The ramp had been finished for less than 48 hours when the first notice appeared on the homeowner's door. Crisp white paper, HOA letterhead, and the unmistakable tone of manufactured authority. It arrived before sunrise, taped just high enough to be noticed immediately, as though whoever placed it wanted to ensure maximum impact. The paper fluttered lightly in the morning breeze, but its message was heavy, cold, and unmistakably hostile. According to the HOA, the wheelchair ramp installed at the front entrance was an unaesthetic modification that violated association guidelines. It demanded immediate removal and warned that daily fines would begin accumulating if compliance was not met within the week. For the homeowner, the ramp had not been a choice made lightly. Months of physical therapy, grueling medical adjustments, and the slow erosion of independence had made the simple act of entering his home a battle. The ramp brought back dignity, allowing him to move freely without relying on neighbors or family to lift, brace, or support him. It was not elaborate, not flashy, not decorated or oversized. It was safe, standard, and built to code. It was nothing more than a small extension of wood and metal rails, functional, clean, and necessary. Yet the HOA fixated on it instantly. The notice didn't come as a polite inquiry or request for explanation. Instead, it arrived as a verdict, a predetermined judgment wrapped in passive-aggressive phrasing. The timing was suspicious, the speed even more so. The ramp had barely been completed, yet the HOA reacted faster than they ever had to overgrown lawns, unregistered vehicles, or actual code issues within the community. It was almost as if they had been waiting for it.in. The days that followed, more notices came. Each one escalated the threat. First, it was a warning. Then it became a scheduled fine. By the end of the week, the HOA claimed the right to charge him daily penalties, each neatly itemized in a growing stack of envelopes slipped under his door and taped to his mailbox. The letters framed their actions as a necessary defense of property values, as though the ramp posed some grave threat to the aesthetics of the neighborhood. The homeowner knew the HOA board had a reputation for overreaching. Requests for paint colors were often delayed for months unless the board president approved of the shade. Small garden decorations mysteriously disappeared from yards. Cars parked half an inch over the curb were photographed and reported. The board members treated the neighborhood like their personal domain, and they wielded the rulebook with an iron grip, often interpreting vague guidelines in whatever way served their interests. But going after a disability ramp? That was new, that was bold, and that was personal. The first step was to gather everything, every letter, every timestamp, every piece of paper. The homeowner kept meticulous records, storing each notice in a folder that soon grew thick. He scoured the HOA handbook carefully, searching for any line that could justify the board's sudden crusade. What he found instead was a surprising absence. Nowhere did the handbook mention ramps, accessibility structures, or guidelines for mobility modifications. Nothing prohibited what he had built, and federal protections existed for accessibility accommodations. The HOA was banking on intimidation, not legality. Still, he understood that fighting the board would not be easy. They held regular meetings that residents rarely attended, largely because the sessions had a reputation for being unproductive and laced with internal politics. The board president, a retiree who boasted about maintaining strict community standards, had been known to shut down concerns, dismiss complaints, and control conversations through procedural tactics. It was clear the president's voice carried disproportionate power within the group, and the other board members usually followed without question. But something about their behavior nagged at the homeowner. It wasn't just the ramp. It was the speed of their reaction, the eagerness with which they issued fines, and the oddly aggressive language in the letters. It felt as though the HOA was trying to draw attention away from something else, to redirect focus somewhere convenient. The homeowner couldn't shake the suspicion that the board's outrage was less about aesthetics and more about hiding a vulnerability, so he began investigating. Public records became his first stop. Permits, construction approvals, zoning requests, anything filed by the HOA in recent months. He combed through online databases late into the night, scrolling past pages of outdated filings and mundane administrative updates. Most documents were dull, predictable, and procedural. But one category caught his attention: maintenance improvement requests. A series of entries showed unusual delays, inconsistencies, and missing signatures. Then there were the financial documents. The HOA had an obligation to provide annual budgets and spending summaries to the residents, though most people never bothered to look. When the homeowner requested copies, he noticed discrepancies. Reports that didn't line up with previous years, vague descriptions of expenditures, and line items that seemed deliberately ambiguous. It wasn't proof of wrongdoing, but it was enough to confirm that something was off. The HOA board, however, remained fixated on the ramp. New letters arrived with increasing pressure. They claimed the ramp lowered curb appeal, clashed with the visual harmony of the neighborhood, and threatened property values. The tone grew harsher, almost frantic. They demanded removal, threatened legal escalation, and insisted their decision was final. But the homeowner stayed calm. Each notice only added fuel to what was becoming a remarkably well-documented pattern of harassment. He photographed the ramp from multiple angles. He captured timestamps. He saved every envelope. And he continued digging through the HOA's operations. That's when he found it. An oddly placed line in an old newsletter uploaded to the HOA's website months earlier. It referenced a temporary structure built behind the HOA president's home during a renovation project. The newsletter described it as a brief workaround for storage during construction. Nothing more. But the homeowner noticed something important. The newsletter was dated 8 months ago. Temporary structures were only allowed for 30 days, and only with proper approval. A twinge of suspicion struck him. He checked aerial maps, old sales photos, and community-shared images on local forums. Then he walked past the board president's property. Slowly enough to observe, discreetly enough not to draw attention. Behind the tall fence, partially concealed by hedges, he spotted it. An unfinished shed-like structure, mismatched in color, visibly worn, and clearly not approved. The ramp, he realized, had never been the problem. It was a distraction. The HOA president was violating the very bylaws the board used to attack everyone else. And the timing of their crusade against him was no coincidence. He had inadvertently created the perfect scapegoat. A highly visible project. A sympathetic case the president assumed he could bully without pushback. The board wanted all eyes on him. They didn't expect him to look back. By the time the final notice arrived, this one threatening referral to the HOA's legal committee, the homeowner had already assembled a thick folder of evidence, records, inconsistencies, and documentation that painted a very different picture of who was actually violating community rules. And he knew exactly what his next step would be. The stack of violation notices had grown thick enough to sag under its own weight, a physical reminder of the HOA's relentless pressure campaign. Yet beneath the mounting threats, a quiet shift had begun. The homeowner was no longer reacting. He was calculating. Every letter, every accusation, every attempt to corner him only strengthened the case he was building behind the scenes. What the HOA believed was intimidation was, in truth, the framing of their undoing. The shed behind the HOA president's house had become the centerpiece of the investigation. Its weathered boards and mismatched paint marked it as a long-term structure, not a temporary solution, and certainly not a permitted project. The HOA bylaws were clear. Any exterior structure required board approval, architectural review, and community notice. The president had bypassed all of that. But a single violation, even a blatant one, might not be enough to topple the board. The homeowner needed a pattern, a chain of decisions revealing hypocrisy and misuse of authority. He began tracing back through the president's tenure, cataloging every instance where rules were enforced unevenly or manipulated to target certain residents. He cross-referenced dates, votes, and approvals. The more he dug, the clearer the pattern became. Certain residents seemed to receive fast-track approvals for projects that should have taken weeks. Others, especially those who had previously disagreed with the board, found themselves stuck in months-long delays or denied entirely. Landscaping changes were approved without review. Paint colors outside the palette were mysteriously accepted. Minor violations were ignored for some homeowners while aggressively pursued for others. The board president's influence was unmistakable, creating an unspoken hierarchy within the community. Friends at the top, critics at the bottom. And now the ramp was being used as a distraction, a spectacle to draw attention away from the president's own long-term rule-breaking. The homeowner knew he needed more than suspicion. He needed irrefutable proof. He walked the neighborhood, quietly observing houses that had similar modifications or structures. A few homes had elevated decks extending beyond their original footprint. Others had privacy fences taller than allowed by the bylaws. He noted each one, recording addresses, dates of installation, and whether official approvals had been published. He checked meeting minutes for references that should have existed but didn't. Patterns emerged quickly. Projects were approved only when beneficial to a select group connected to the board president. The more evidence he gathered, the more the HOA intensified its pressure. The letters became daily occurrences, each more aggressive than the last. They now included threats of liens, legal costs, and the possibility of forced removal of the ramp. The language dripped with confidence, as though the board was certain of its untouchable authority. But inside his home, the homeowner organized a strategy built on precision. Binder clips separated categories of violations. Tabs marked dates, signatures, and missing forms. A timeline emerged on paper, a roadmap of the HOA's hypocrisy. The turning point came when he discovered the budget inconsistencies that he had previously brushed off. A line item labeled community maintenance, supplemental, appeared repeatedly, each time with a substantial cost attached to it. But the maintenance records showed no corresponding work done. No repairs, no upgrades, no community announcements. He dug deeper. Old invoices were generic, lacking details. A landscaping contractor listed in the budget didn't appear in any local business registry. Payments were frequent, but the community landscaping hadn't changed in years. Then a familiar name appeared on one of the invoices, a surname matching the HOA president's extended family. It confirmed everything. The HOA president wasn't just breaching rules. He was funneling association funds through a shell contractor and approving his own projects while attacking anyone else who made improvements without his blessing. The ramp wasn't a violation. The president's entire leadership was. With the evidence in hand, the homeowner knew he needed to present his findings in a way the HOA couldn't ignore. The annual open meeting was coming up, a rare moment when the full community gathered. It was the only time residents could directly question the board, request documents, or propose motions. Typically, the meeting came and went quietly, with the president guiding the agenda and neighbors nodding along. But this year would be different. The homeowner prepared methodically. He printed copies of the shed photos, side-by-side comparisons with the bylaws, and highlighted sections showing the required permits. He laid out timelines connecting the president's unapproved construction with the harassment campaign against him. He included records of every threatening notice concerning the ramp. And then he compiled the financial discrepancies, tracing payments, matching dates, and linking the board president to the fraudulent contractor. With every page added, the binder grew into a weapon, not of revenge through violence or confrontation, but through cold, incontrovertible truth. The night before the meeting, the homeowner couldn't shake the tension from his mind. He understood the gravity of what he was about to do. Challenging the HOA president would disrupt the power structure of the entire neighborhood. It would expose years of misconduct, favoritism, and financial abuse. Some neighbors would be shocked. Others, perhaps, had long suspected something was wrong but lacked the proof. The meeting could end in uproar. But it could also bring justice, not just for the ramp, but for everyone who had been unfairly targeted or silenced over the years. He spent the final hours reviewing each document, rehearsing the order in which he would present them, ensuring that nothing was left unclear. The ramp had been installed out of necessity. The fight had evolved into something much larger. It was no longer about aesthetics or property values. It was about accountability, fairness, and the responsibility of those in power. The morning of the meeting arrived with an uneasy stillness. The community clubhouse stood at the edge of the neighborhood, its windows glowing softly, chairs arranged in neat rows inside. Residents filed in slowly, some carrying coffee, others whispering about the agenda. The HOA board sat at the front, papers neatly stacked, the president wearing the same confident expression he always carried at these gatherings, and no one suspected what was coming. The homeowner entered quietly, his binder tucked under his arm. He found a seat near the front, close enough to be seen, but far enough to observe the board's reactions. The president scanned the room, unaware of the storm building just a few feet away. When the meeting began, the usual monotony unfolded. Financial summaries, landscaping updates, reminders about trash bin placement. The president spoke with rehearsed authority, guiding the discussion smoothly, expecting the meeting to conclude as uneventfully as it usually did. But when the floor opened for community concerns, the homeowner rose slowly, binder in hand, and stepped forward. Everything he had worked toward was about to unfold. The room, once softly buzzing with casual conversation, shifted into a tense stillness the moment the homeowner placed his binder on the podium. The soft click of the cover opening echoed faintly, drawing the eyes of every resident toward him. For years, these meetings had followed the same predictable rhythm: polite announcements, minor complaints, and quick adjournments. But tonight, the rhythm fractured. Something heavier hung in the air, something charged with purpose. The homeowner began by laying out the timeline of events, calmly and methodically. He described the ramp, its necessity, and the rapid escalation of violation notices. He referenced the first letter, then the second, then the relentless pile that followed. As he turned the pages, he presented each notice as evidence, stacked layers of hostility disguised as policy. Residents leaned forward in their chairs, their expressions tightening as the pattern became clear. The board members, especially the president, shifted uncomfortably. The confidence they'd carried into the meeting had begun to erode. The homeowner wasn't raising his voice or relying on dramatics. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke with a steady, undeniable force. The audience took in every detail, each page a mirror reflecting the board's overreach. Then came the turning point. The homeowner slid a new set of papers onto the podium, photographs of the shed behind the HOA president's house. Its unapproved construction, mismatched exterior, and clear permanence were impossible to deny. He outlined the exact bylaw sections violated, the permitting requirements ignored, and the maximum allowed duration exceeded by months. The room stirred with whispers. The board president's jaw tightened, his hands clasping the edge of the table a little too firmly. The homeowner didn't stop there. He flipped to the next section of the binder, presenting screenshots of dated community newsletters, aerial photos, and records showing the shed's long-standing presence. The evidence dismantled any argument the president might have made. It became unmistakably clear. While the board aggressively targeted a disabled homeowner's legal and necessary ramp, the president had been quietly hiding an unapproved structure in his own backyard. But the revelation was only the beginning. The binder turned again, and this time the pages revealed financial summaries, carefully highlighted lines indicating discrepancies, questionable contractor payments, and signatures that led back to the president's own extended family. The homeowner laid out the irregularities meticulously. Repeated charges under vague labels, non-existent maintenance projects, and suspicious payment patterns. The shell company connection snapped everything into focus. Residents murmured, some in disbelief, others nodding as if previous suspicions had finally found their proof. The HOA board members exchanged uneasy glances. The president attempted to maintain composure, but his posture had changed. His once commanding demeanor had fractured under the weight of exposure. The homeowner explained how the fraudulent contractor listed in the budget didn't exist in business registries, how the invoices lacked detail, and how payments coincided neatly with periods of increased fines and aggressive enforcement. Residents who once assumed their monthly dues were being used responsibly now realized how much had been siphoned away under the guise of maintenance. The room erupted into a low hum of outrage. The homeowner then revealed the structure of retaliation built. Against him, the rushed notices, the inaccuracies in the citations, and the complete absence of any rule prohibiting accessibility modifications. He presented federal accessibility protections, showing how the board's actions potentially violated disability rights regulations. The residents reacted sharply to this revelation, many visibly appalled that the board would target a homeowner over a medical necessity. The evidence painted an unmistakable picture. The president had weaponized the HOA rulebook to distract from his own misconduct. The ramp wasn't an eyesore. It was a threat to the secrecy of his violations. And the president had acted boldly because he believed no one would challenge him. But now, he was being challenged by an entire room. As the homeowner concluded, he calmly placed the binder back on the podium. The air felt electrified, each resident processing what they had just seen. The board members sat stiffly, stunned into silence. The president's face had gone rigid, the color drained, his authority dissolving before the community's collective eyes. Then the questions began. Residents stood one after another, voicing concerns, anger, and demands for accountability. Some asked about the shed. Others confronted the financial discrepancies. The president struggled to respond, offering vague denials that held no weight against the mountain of evidence. The board members, now recognizing the fragility of their positions, attempted to distance themselves from the president's decisions, but their complicity was already exposed. The meeting spiraled into an eruption of long-suppressed grievances. Neighbors who had been fined unfairly found their voices. Those who had experienced delays in approvals or inconsistent enforcement stood up and shared their stories. The community realized that the homeowner's experience wasn't isolated. It was part of a pattern that had shaped the neighborhood for years. A forced vote was called by the residents, invoking a clause rarely used but legally valid. The tension in the room thickened as ballots were distributed, collected, and counted. The results were swift and decisive. The HOA president was removed from his position by an overwhelming majority. 2 additional board members who had enabled and supported him were also voted out. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room as the final tally was announced. In the wake of the vote, the community moved quickly. A new interim board was appointed. Residents who had previously been too intimidated to run but were now galvanized by the evening's events. One of their first actions was to formally invalidate the fines issued against the homeowner, acknowledging the ramp as fully compliant and protected by law. Another motion was passed to initiate a third-party audit of the HOA's finances, ensuring that any misappropriated funds would be uncovered and addressed. The shed behind the former president's house was scheduled for mandatory removal pending investigation. He stormed out of the clubhouse before the meeting even ended, no longer shielded by the authority he once wielded so freely. As he left, residents watched in silence, some with anger, others with a sense of closure. The facade of control he'd maintained for years had finally collapsed. The homeowner remained in his seat as the meeting wound down, exhaustion mixing with quiet triumph. He hadn't wanted a battle, but he had refused to be bullied. What started as a personal fight for dignity had unfolded into a community reckoning. His ramp, once framed as a violation, now stood as a symbol of resilience and accountability. In the following weeks, the neighborhood underwent a transformation. The new board implemented transparency measures, shared financial updates openly, and encouraged resident involvement. The community, once fearful of HOA retaliation, began to feel empowered to express concerns and propose improvements. And the ramp remained exactly where it belonged, steady, functional, and untouched. The homeowner's life regained its rhythm. The letters stopped. The hostility disappeared. Neighbors who had once remained distant began offering support, gratitude, and even apologies for not stepping forward sooner. The quiet street felt lighter, less tense, no longer under the shadow of unjust authority. Justice had been served, not through confrontation or chaos, but through truth, resilience, and the unshakable resolve to stand up against abuse of power.